Hey guys, tonight we're taking a sleepy stroll through 16th century Istanbul, a city of tiled courtyards, call to prayer echoing over rooftops, and oddly enough, a place where your social standing might hinge on how gracefully you pour a tiny cup of coffee. You wander cobbled lanes still glistening from an early rain, guided mostly by smell. It starts faint, a toasty, earthy note cutting through the sea breeze, then stronger, spiced, somehow warm even before you find the source. You round a corner, and there it is, a smoky little stall, barely more than a shaded nook, and a long-handled pan stirring something deep and brown over glowing embers. Welcome to the very beginning of your Ottoman coffee journey. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Drop it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The drink you're sniffing so eagerly isn't quite the same thing your barista spills when they misspell your name. No foam art, no cardboard sleeve. It's thick, nearly muddy, boiled in a copper chesve with sugar added in secretive amounts. Sweet, medium, or none, based entirely on whispered requests. You're in Istanbul, mid-1500s, and the empire is enormous. Coffee didn't start here, but it's just arriving, likely through Sufi mystics from Yemen who brewed it to stay awake during midnight prayers. A spiritual Red Bull, if you will, though no one calls it coffee yet. Not exactly. The word floats in different forms, qahwa, kahve, drifting through Arabic and Turkish mouths. You trail behind a man in embroidered slippers who seems to know where he's going. He ducks into a courtyard shaded by vines and lanterns, and you follow because why not? Inside, several figures are seated cross-legged, facing a central copper pot. You try not to trip over the cat snoring by the door. This isn't just a place to grab a drink. It's a ritual. The pot bubbles gently, and nobody's in a hurry. There's a deep seriousness to the slowness. One cup, one pour, one silent moment between each step. It's not about hydration, it's about attention. The man in slippers finally notices you and gestures almost lazily to sit. A small porcelain fincan is handed your way, no handle, delicate as a bird's egg. You're not supposed to gulp. In fact, gulping would be embarrassing. Historians still argue whether this early phase of coffee in the empire was an elite indulgence or a subversive habit among scholars and poets. You suspect both are true. What is clear is this: it arrives with enough ceremony to make tea blush. You learn later that the Ottoman Empire didn't just accept coffee, it rebranded it. They gave it context, costume, and choreography. By the end of the century, there were professional coffee brewers, kahveshi, in palace kitchens whose entire job was to master this one drink. And let's not forget the accessories. You see trays inlaid with mother-of-pearl, small embroidered napkins, and cups with gold-plated holders, so no one had to touch anything hot like a blacksmith's tears, as one particularly poetic pamphlet put it. The empire, as always, is watching. New things are both exciting and suspicious. You hear stories of a cleric down the street muttering that coffee might cause fitna, civil unrest. Maybe it's the way people gather around it, whispering freely. Or maybe it's just jealousy over not being invited. Later, as the sky turns pink, you meander through a neighborhood where every other window seems to glow with lantern light and smell faintly of cardamom. Someone offers you a sweet rahat locum, soft and floral, almost too pretty to chew. You eat it anyway, and just like that, you're hooked. Not on the caffeine, that comes later, but on the performance, the pause between steps, the way even the silence has a shape. You're not just drinking a cup of coffee, you're drinking time itself. You don't realize you've been pulled into the palace until it's far too late to back out. 1 minute, you're sipping coffee beside a sleepy merchant who insists he once shared a pot with a wandering poet, and the next, you're being sized up by two sharply dressed eunuchs in the shadow of Topkapi Palace's looming gates. The air inside the imperial complex feels different, still, expensive, like it's been filtered through silk. You follow the eunuchs through tiled corridors, past perfumed halls, and into a chamber that smells overwhelmingly of, what else? Coffee. But not the kind you just drank. This is richer, spicier, almost intimidating. You half expect the coffee to speak before the Sultan does. This, you're told without much ceremony, is your trial run. The court has heard of your newfound interest in coffee, and apparently that's enough to qualify you for temporary apprenticeship under the palace's bashkaveci, chief coffee maker. Don't ask how they found out. Everyone here seems to know everything, including how many times you blinked yesterday. Now the bashkaveci doesn't speak to you directly, not at first. He gestures with one long finger toward a tray of brewing tools, each polished to a mirror finish. There are kezves of varying sizes, long-handled and narrow-necked, plus an alarming number of small embroidered towels. You're expected to know what they're all for. You do not. Still, you mimic what you can. Clean hands, steady pour, circular motion when mixing the grounds with water. You even remember to heat the water slowly over a charcoal brazier, not a roaring flame. Too much heat, and the coffee will foam too early. Too little, and it tastes like regret. Coffee here is balance. The palace version of this drink is nothing short of theatrical. Saffron might be added, maybe even rosewater, depending on who's being served. The sugar levels are pre-ordered, and God help you if you mix them up. Legend says one unlucky apprentice once sweetened the Sultan's bitter-only kave, and his career ended somewhere in the stable department. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman court adopted coffee as a sign of refinement or simply as a power tool. The truth? Both. In a place where hierarchy is everything, the slow ritual of coffee allowed even the most minor official to feel momentarily grand. Your first pour is passable. No one claps, but also no one throws you out. The bashkavachi nods once. You think that's a good sign. He then launches into an entirely silent critique, involving 5 fingers, a subtle sniff, and what might be a frown hidden beneath his mustache. Over the next few days, you learn to read this man like a particularly grumpy poetry scroll. He communicates entirely through gesture. Too bitter is a slight tap on the nose. Good foam is a tiny nod. You've offended the ancestors involves turning his back on you for the rest of the day. Still, you survive. More than survive, you adapt. You even begin to understand the rhythm of courtly coffee service. It's not about speed, it's about stillness. Every movement is intentional, every pause loaded with meaning. Sometimes guests are made to wait, not as punishment, but as punctuation. You notice, too, how the court uses coffee for more than refreshment. It's an excuse to delay unpleasant conversations, a way to hold court without holding judgment. The Sultan listens differently with a cup in hand. Ministers mutter secrets between sips. Servants learn to read moods from how fast or slow the coffee disappears. There's even talk of coffee diplomacy, how certain foreign ambassadors are served subtly weaker brews as a gentle insult or overly sweet cups to flatter. It's all encoded, delicious subtext in porcelain cups. One morning, you watch a servant drop a single clove into a guest's cup, just one. This, you're told, is a signal. The guest talks too much. Whether they notice or not is irrelevant. The message has been delivered, and yet, for all the formality, there's comfort here too. The repetition of the process, the earthy smell grounding you amid marble opulence. Even the grumpy Bashkavechi starts leaving your chesve, unpolished as a sign of trust. A perfect chesve gleams, a real one brews. Sometimes, between shifts, you sneak a second cup for yourself, hiding behind a curtain that smells like musk and ambition. The grounds settle slowly, and you sip even slower. You imagine what the beans saw on their way here, from Ethiopian hillsides to Yemeni ports, across the Red Sea in salt-stained dhows, up caravan trails into the heart of the empire. One day, you'll tell that story too. But for now, you simply listen to the silence as your coffee cools, soft steam curling into the velvet air of the palace that's decided, for reasons it hasn't shared yet, that you belong. It turns out brewing is just the beginning. You may have mastered the shezvui and learned the silent language of the Bashkaveshi's arched eyebrow, but now comes the real challenge, the art of serving. Today, you're being coached by a woman known simply as Taze, or Auntie, though she's no relative of yours. She's somewhere between a drill sergeant and a grandmother, wrinkled but wiry, draped in embroidered robes, and holding a tiny porcelain cup as though it might explode at any moment. "You walk like a camel with bad knees," she mutters, again. Serving coffee in the Ottoman court isn't just a physical act, it's a performance. The kahve sunumu, or coffee presentation, was a full-body poem. Every movement had meaning. You don't walk, you glide. You don't pour, you coax the coffee into the cup like you're whispering secrets. And oh, the steps. You begin with a slow, respectful approach, never making eye contact unless you want to lose your apprenticeship and probably your reputation. Then there's the bow, the rotation of the tray, always clockwise, the graceful lift of the cup, and the careful placement just so, with the handle turned right, if there is one at all. Many Ottoman cups had none. You're holding a vessel barely larger than a walnut and trying not to tremble like it's an exam you didn't study for. Taze watches every gesture. She clicks her tongue if your foot placement is off by half an inch. She sighs deeply when you pause to scratch your nose. And yet, her standards are strangely comforting. There's clarity in her precision, a ritual you can disappear into. Historians still debate how much of this elaborate serving culture was rooted in genuine etiquette versus its role as soft power, turning every coffee exchange into a demonstration of control. You're starting to suspect it's both. The slower you move, the more you say without speaking. By midweek, your arms remember what your brain can't. Your tray hand stays level even as a court cat dashes underfoot. You've developed a sixth sense for whether a guest prefers orta, medium sweet, or sad, unsweetened. You're even beginning to distinguish between different kahve finkana shapes, some wide-mouthed for fast cooling, others narrow to trap the aroma like perfume. One afternoon, you find yourself assigned to serve a visiting poet from Bursa. He wears 8 layers of robes, recites couplets while chewing pistachios, and insists his coffee be prepared with the patience of a stone turning to dust. You don't know what that means. No one does. But you do your best. You approach, glide, bow, and pour. He nods. "This tastes like the edge of spring," he says, pleased. You exhale for the first time in what feels like an hour. Later, Taze rewards you with a candy so sweet your teeth ache. "Good," she says. "Now try not to trip tomorrow." You begin to understand that this slowness, the ceremony, the pauses, the precise etiquette, isn't just for show. It's a kind of discipline, a way of life in a court where one misstep can spell exile and one perfect cup can mean quiet approval from someone who controls your entire future. Still, even in the rigidity, you find small rebellions. A smirk passed between servers, a slightly exaggerated swirl of foam. Taze catches you once pretending to fall dramatically while balancing the tray. She hides her laughter behind a cough. For a second, she is almost human. By the end of the week, your joints ache and your back has learned a posture previously reserved for reed flutes. But you've earned something like acceptance. When the Bashkavachi passes you a cup instead of a command, you've graduated for now. That night, you walk through the quiet corridors of the palace alone. The marble floors gleam under oil lamps, and the garden beyond the archways smells faintly of orange blossom and coal smoke. You carry a single cup, your own, a quiet ritual. One pour, one sip, one moment. You realize then that this isn't just about coffee. It never was. It's about awareness, grace under pressure, the art of not rushing, the power in doing one thing, just one thing with absolute care, even if that thing is delivering a tiny, trembling cup to a man who will judge you based on its foam. It's early morning again, but this time, the scent of roasted coffee leads you not to the palace, but down a maze of back streets into a different kind of temple, the Kahvahane, the Ottoman coffee house. The atmosphere is cooler, looser. If the palace was a stage play, the coffee house is a dress rehearsal with better jokes. Here, the coffee is just as rich, but the conversation flows more freely. You step inside and immediately feel the shift. Smoke curls up from a brazier, old men slap down backgammon pieces, and the soft murmur of poetry and politics drifts above the clinking of cups. You find a corner cushion and sit. A boy who looks no older than 12 offers you a cup with one hand and a stare that says, "Don't ask what's in it." You sip. It's dark, gritty, and somehow tastes like gossip. Historians still debate whether these Kavahain were centers of learning or dens of subversion. Probably both. They were famously male-dominated spaces, but also more democratic than most places in the empire. A merchant could debate a poet. A soldier could outchess a scholar. And everyone, absolutely everyone, had an opinion on coffee foam. A man beside you, wrapped in a cloak that smells faintly of cardamom and optimism, begins telling a story. It starts with pirates, detours into a tax complaint, and ends, somehow, with a recipe for pickled eggplant. You nod solemnly. This seems about right. This Kavahan doesn't serve food, but you're handed a plate of Caesari, carrot-based sweets coated in coconut. They stick to your teeth and make the bitter coffee taste like dessert. A small boy offers you more. You hand over a coin. He tucks it into his sock. In the far corner, someone starts reciting lines from a new poem about horses and heartbreak. Another table erupts into laughter at a joke you missed, probably involving court officials and their very peculiar hats. You notice how the servers here aren't performing the palace's careful ballet. They're quick, even cheeky. One server sets down a tray with a wink and a flourish, like a magician revealing a trick. But the fundamentals remain. Even here, each cup has weight, each pour a rhythm. You can leave your titles at the door, but you better sip respectfully. An older man across the room is reading aloud, something philosophical, maybe from Avicenna or Rumi, though he pauses occasionally to glare at a young man tapping his cup too loud. Coffee houses, you learn, have their own etiquette, not as strict as the palaces, but just as serious. No shouting, no drunkenness, no playing the flute unless invited. And chess? Chess is sacred. You move closer to a table where a game is underway. The players lean over the board as if staring into the abyss. One piece moves. Silence. A bead of sweat rolls. Another move. Someone coughs dramatically. The tension is broken when one of them spills coffee on his sleeve and mutters something unprintable in 3 languages. You learn that some Kafahanes specialize. One down the road is known for its storytellers, another for shadow puppetry. A third only serves people who write upside down, allegedly as a test of humility. Whether that one's a myth is anyone's guess. By the end of the evening, you've heard tales of love, revenge, miraculous goats, and why one man refuses to drink from anything made in Damascus. All of it steeped in coffee steam and sandalwood smoke. You step outside into the night air, full of beans and barely half the stories. Behind you, the coffee house glows like a lantern, its windows flickering with laughter, argument, and that subtle clink of ceramic on wood. You realize something strange. You feel relaxed, not just from the warmth of the drink or the cushion under your back, but from the slow, rolling rhythm of it all. The conversations, the pours, the unhurried way the city breathes after dark. The coffee houses may not serve sultans, but they serve something else: connection. Not in grand pronouncements or royal decrees, but in shared silences, in the careful lean in before a whispered joke, in the way you all reach for your cups at once. You turn a corner toward home and catch a final whiff of cardamom and coals. It follows you down the alley like an old friend. It's your 3rd week among the coffee servers now, and you've begun to notice something peculiar. No one speaks much while serving. There's chatter, sure, in the coffee houses and among the guests. But the servers? The kvetchi move like ghosts in velvet slippers, communicating more through their eyebrows than their tongues. Today, you're being trained in the strange ballet of silent service. Your teacher, a man named Hasten who looks like a walnut in human form, rarely says anything above a mutter. Instead, he teaches you with gestures. A flick of the fingers means wait, 2 quick nods means now, and a look that could curdle yogurt means you've committed some kind of terrible tray offense. You start the day by observing him in action. He doesn't just serve coffee, he conducts it. When he enters a room, the atmosphere shifts. Conversations pause. All eyes drift subtly toward him, not with fear, but with reverence. Hassan lifts his sezve with care, turns the handle as if dialing in the mood, and pours with the precision of a mathematician carving poetry into numbers. His tray is always perfectly balanced, not just physically, but socially. Each cup sits at a precise angle. Each guest is served in the correct order. Oldest first, unless there's a cleric present, unless the cleric outranks the host, unless the host is also a cleric, in which case good luck to you. Historians still argue whether this elaborate code of gestures originated in the palace kitchens or was borrowed from older caravanserai traditions, where traders communicated across languages using signs. Either way, in the Ottoman world, silence is a language all its own. You start practicing the basics, holding the tray with your fingertips, moving like you're floating, maintaining a face that says nothing but implies everything. It's not easy. Your first few attempts end with a ceramic thud, a dropped napkin, and an elderly poet raising an eyebrow so high it nearly joins his turban. Eventually, you get better. You learn to convey entire thoughts with a glance. Your coffee is nearly ready. Yes, I remembered you like it bitter. Please don't ask for another baklava, I beg of you. This quiet code isn't just efficiency, it's armor. In the palace, words can be dangerous. A misplaced compliment can be construed as flattery. A joke overheard by the wrong eunuch can lead to a long vacation in the provinces without your head. But gesture is plausible deniability. You weren't being rude. That eyebrow raise, just a twitch. That deep sigh, mere digestion. The Ottoman coffee server learns to navigate tension without ever opening their mouth. And it's not just among servants. Even guests develop their own language. A slight tilt of the cup left on its saucer might mean the guest is done. A slower sip, eyes closed, means satisfaction. A hurried gulp, well, that's just poor taste. Hassan demonstrates one of the more complex moves, the subtle pass of a note beneath a sugar cube. It's done in one motion, without dropping a crumb. You try and immediately spill the sugar into your shoe. You'll get there, he finally says aloud, his voice gravelly from disuse. Or you won't. That night, you practice in your room. No audience, no pressure. You balance a tray with 2 cups, a sugar bowl, a cinnamon stick, and a fig. You cross the room in silence, bow slightly, pour without spilling, and nod to the invisible vizier on your pillow. The room claps with silence. Outside, the palace begins to quiet. You can hear the occasional flutter of a pigeon on the rooftop, the soft hum of wind against stone. Somewhere, someone else is pouring a cup for someone important, and doing it without speaking. You understand now, this isn't about muteness, it's about control. You're learning to speak without permission, to navigate with grace, to influence gently the way the coffee does, without force, without volume, but with warmth and presence and a curl of steam that lingers long after the last drop is gone. You've served ministers, you've poured for poets, you've nodded at eunuchs with the stoicism of a weathered tapestry. But today, you enter a space where your usual training evaporates at the threshold, the women's coffee salon. Here, the air smells different, lighter, like rosewater, honey, and confidence. The palace's female quarters, the harem, yes, but not the fever dream of foreign travelers, are more like a court within a court. Politics exist here too, but they're wrapped in silk and spoken in whispers over tiny cups of syrup-sweet sherbet and steaming coffee. You've been summoned to assist, not serve directly. That role is for the kalfas and usta kadınlar, the women attendants who glide with a smoothness that makes your best bow look like a goat slipping on marble. Your job is background, support. Refill the sugar, replenish the hot coals, and, above all, keep your mouth shut and eyes down. Still, you can't help but peek. The gathering unfolds like a play. A half circle of low cushions, gold-threaded embroidery, and chatter in a dozen dialects. The Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, sits beneath an enormous fan of ostrich feathers, sipping her coffee as if it contains foreign policy. Historians still debate how much political influence Ottoman women wielded from behind those gilded screens. But when you see 3 court letters being discreetly passed between silver trays, you begin to suspect the answer is a great deal. The kave here isn't bitter like the viziers prefer. It's thick, sweet, and sometimes laced with cinnamon or cloves. It arrives with lokum, Turkish delight in rose, lemon, and pistachio, and occasionally a small side dish of gossip. You hover nearby as one woman leans in to whisper, then draws a finger across her empty saucer. Another follows her lead. The attendants gather the empty cups and peer into the leftover grounds. Here, tasseography, coffee fortune-telling, isn't a party trick. It's a serious ritual. Futures are read, not always with pleasure. One attendant frowns into a cup and mutters something about a crooked path. The woman who drank it chuckles lightly, but you notice she doesn't finish her second piece of lokum. Tasseography isn't confined to the palace. It's common across the empire, from Istanbul to Aleppo, Cairo to Thessaloniki. You've seen market women flip their cups over and raid fortunes between haggling sessions. But here, it has teeth. A cleverly read symbol might flatter a superior or warn against a marriage. A poorly interpreted blob of sediment? Dangerous. You're sent to refill the coals, and on the way back, you pause briefly near the lattice screens that separate the salon from the garden. A pair of women lounge near the window, half listening to the others and quietly discussing a recipe involving quince and an absurd amount of butter. One of them laughs and turns to you, not unkindly. "Tell me," she says, "do you believe the coffee tells the truth?" You're not sure how to answer, so you offer a shrug and what you hope is a wisely ambiguous smile. She seems satisfied. "Good," she replies, "because I lie to mine all the time." She tips her cup, revealing a perfectly swirled pattern inside. "See? That's not a snake. That's just me in a bad mood." The rest of the day passes in a blur of clinking saucers, polite giggles, and the occasional dramatic sigh. You begin to see how different this world is, not less powerful than the male court, but subtler, wrapped in gauze instead of armor. And here, etiquette is different too. It's less about formality, more about nuance. The way a cup is held, the speed at which it's sipped, even the angle of a plate of sweets, all of it says something. You try to keep up, but by midday your brain feels like overstirred foam. You find yourself back in the outer corridor, watching the light shift across the tiles. The women inside are still talking, still sipping. It could go on forever. One of the older attendants brushes past and drops something into your palm, a single piece of pistachio lokum wrapped in gold thread. "For your silence," she says with a wink. You nod, tuck it away, and begin preparing the next tray. It's a quiet morning. Well, as quiet as Istanbul ever gets. And you're summoned not to the palace, nor to the coffee house, but to a merchant's home in the artisan's quarter. The job? Assist with the cleaning, arranging, and displaying of a full Ottoman coffee set for an upcoming family ceremony. You arrive to find half the household in a panic. Rugs are being beaten, brass trays are being scrubbed with vinegar and lemon until they gleam like they've just been invented. A small child is crying in a corner because someone told him he couldn't lick the sugar spoon. It's going well. You're handed a dust cloth and a box of coffee utensils that could rival a royal dowry. There's the sezve, not just one, but three, each a different size and lined with silver on the inside. Then the kahve finkana, their dainty porcelain cups resting inside ornate holders called zarf, so no one burns their delicate fingertips. The zarfs are decorated with filigree, semi-precious stones, and an impressive amount of mother-of-pearl that reflects your frazzled face back at you. Even the serving tray, massive, engraved, and slightly dented at the edge, which you will later learn is a story unto itself involving a goat and a poorly timed sneeze, gets polished within an inch of its life. The sugar bowl has a tiny spoon with a carved ivory handle. There are napkins embroidered with tulips, the imperial flower. There's even a long-handled incense burner for waving over the set before guests arrive, infusing the whole area with the scent of ambergris and sandalwood. Historians still argue whether these extravagant tools were everyday fare or strictly ceremonial. Some say even modest homes maintained a few good pieces, used on Fridays or when trying to impress a potential in-law. Others suggest it was mostly the urban elite who decked out their coffee sets like miniature treasure hoards. You're beginning to believe the truth lies somewhere in between, because this merchant isn't poor, but he certainly isn't a vizier either. And yet, the reverence he shows his coffee service rivals anything you saw in the palace. As you help arrange the pieces, you're reminded of a phrase you once overheard in a market. A man is judged not by the house he keeps, but by the tray he brings. It sounds silly, until you're the one responsible for getting the sugar dish aligned just right. The woman of the house, sharp-eyed and wielding a feather duster like a royal scepter, explains each item to you as if it were a museum piece. The ibrick, for instance, used for pouring water to cleanse the hands before coffee is served. The mangal, for heating the coals. The murapat, heavier, used for strong, bitter brews in other regions of the empire. And of course, the coffee itself must be stored in a decorative container, preferably with a lock. She shows you a small lacquered chest with a key so tiny it could double as a hairpin. To keep the aroma in, she says with a wink. You suspect it's also to keep the neighbors out. Once everything is polished, arranged, and blessed with a puff of scented smoke, you're offered a seat and, at long last, a cup. This one tastes of cloves and patience. The woman sits across from you and watches, not with suspicion, but with approval. You've done well, she says, even held the zarf properly. Most men grab it like a soup bowl. You sip carefully. You're learning. Before you leave, the merchant shows you one final object, a coffee grinder, unlike any you've seen. Small, brass, covered in floral etchings, and operated by a crank so squeaky it could wake a sleeping sultan. He lets you try it. You turn, slowly, listening to the crunch of beans and the faint metallic groan. There's something soothing about it, manual, deliberate, no rushing here, grind, measure, brew, serve, each step its own small ritual, wrapped in craftsmanship and ornament. You walk home later with coffee dust on your sleeves and a faint burn on your thumb from a kezve that got overly ambitious. You pass others with simpler setups, a man with a copper pot over a street-side brazier, a vendor with mismatched cups but perfect foam. And yet, the artistry still echoes. Even the humblest service has a touch of performance. You realize that in this empire, beauty and coffee go hand in hand. It's not enough to drink it. You must honor it through tools, through movement, through intention, even if the goat does occasionally dent your tray. The scent hits you before you see the sign. Clove, smoke, a hint of nutmeg, and something else. Fear, maybe. You've stumbled upon one of the more peculiar moments in Ottoman coffee history, a time when drinking your morning cup could get you arrested, or worse. You're in the reign of Sultan Murad IV now, a man whose fondness for absolute order extended far beyond military drills and tax codes. He outlawed a lot of things: alcohol, tobacco, gambling, but coffee? Yes, coffee too. It's hard to believe as you glance around. You're standing outside a back alley secret kavahain, its door camouflaged behind a curtain of laundry and the faint sound of someone playing a knee flute badly. The coffee house is hidden, but barely, but so everyone knows it's there. It's just a game of who pretends not to notice. Historians still argue whether Murad's coffee ban was motivated by moral panic, political fear, or simply the Sultan's personal taste. Some say he worried that the coffee houses were hatching grounds for rebellion. Too many men gathered, sitting in circles, discussing books and ideas, and bad satirical poetry. Others point to the rise in tobacco use, often paired with coffee, and a general campaign against perceived vices. Whatever the cause, the punishment was no joke. In some accounts, Murad himself roamed the streets in disguise, sword in hand, delivering justice to anyone caught mid-sip. Whether that's fully true or just imperial gossip, well, no one dares test it. Inside the secret kavahain, you see signs of adaptation. The sezves are smaller. The brewing is quieter. Instead of bubbling over open flame, the coffee is warmed slowly under a lidded brazier. No clinking, no shouting. Conversations are carried out in hushed tones, laughter swallowed before it escapes too loudly. The server, an older man with a beard that could hide several spoons, moves with caution. He watches the door like it might betray him. His apron is spotless. His hands never shake. He hands you a cup with a nod that says, "Sip it like you're drinking soup, alone, in the dark." You do as you're told, and honestly, it tastes better somehow. Danger has a way of sharpening flavor. The foam clings to the rim, the grounds settle just so, and you find yourself savoring it with an intensity you didn't know you possessed. A student beside you whispers a joke, something about Murad IV's mustache and a particularly rude coffee stain. You try not to laugh. You fail. Someone shushes you from behind a curtain. Outside, a patrol passes. Everyone in the kavahain freezes. The boy at the back casually flips a lever, and the brazier sinks into a compartment in the floor. Another flick, and a board drops over the trays. The room looks within seconds like a modest spice shop. Genius. When the danger passes, the game resumes. The sezve reappears. Coffee is poured, and the same student continues his story like nothing happened. It's surreal. One moment you're joking about bad poetry, the next you're sipping contraband beneath a curtain while trying to look like you're shopping for saffron. Later, you hear whispers about underground delivery services, servants paid to sneak coffee to private homes under the guise of bringing laundry or bread. One bold woman allegedly wore a chest tray beneath her robes and carried coffee to officials who missed their daily fix too much to obey the law. You're told that enforcement was strictest in Istanbul, looser in the provinces. Even so, the fear was real. The empire was vast, but news traveled fast, and punishment, when it came, could be swift and theatrical. Still, people drank. They always drank. Secret gatherings, coded invitations, cups disguised as ink pots. You learn that some even brewed coffee inside hookah pipes, claiming it was a new form of tobacco just to get around suspicion. Eventually, the bans eased. Later sultans, perhaps wiser or simply more caffeinated, relaxed the rules. Coffee returned to the court, to the markets, to the homes. But the memory lingered. Even today, the old server tells you, some guests still look over their shoulder before they take the first sip. You leave the secret cave behind just before dawn, your breath clouding the air. The streets are mostly empty, save for a few vendors preparing their carts and one particularly judgmental cat. And as you walk, you realize that coffee in the Ottoman world was never just about flavor or wakefulness. It was about resistance, about presence, about quiet defiance poured into a small porcelain cup. You smile, sip, and keep walking. You're not exactly sure how it happened, but today you find yourself apprenticed to a man who hasn't spoken a full sentence since the reign of the last sultan. They call him Kahvetsi Dilsiz, the mute coffee master. To be clear, you're not even sure he's actually mute. He might just prefer silence. Either way, he's the best coffee brewer in the neighborhood, and you're his new assistant/unpaid follower, which mostly involves trying to interpret his deeply expressive eyebrows and the occasional theatrical sigh. He wears a faded blue robe, stitched with patches that look more like constellations than repairs. His sezve is older than most buildings you've seen, its copper darkened from decades of use. And somehow, despite his refusal to speak, he commands the room like a sultan without a sword. Your lessons begin immediately. Lesson 1: Foam is king. If your coffee doesn't arrive with a smooth, unbroken layer of foam, K-Mac, you may as well throw it in the Bosphorus. Dilsiz shows you how to stir just enough, heat just slowly enough, and pour just gently enough so the foam sits on top like a royal decree. Lesson 2: Never overboil. He glares at your bubbling sezve until you remove it from the brazier, then uses a single raised finger to signal, cool it down and try again. Somehow, that one finger says more than your cousin's entire wedding toast. Lesson 3: Silence is part of the flavor. No clanging cups, no rushed words. The process should be meditative, almost spiritual, like you're inviting the coffee to reveal itself, not forcing it to cooperate. Historians still argue whether these silent coffee masters were part of a monastic tradition or simply eccentrics who became revered over time. Some say the silence originated from Sufi practices, where brewing was a form of dhikr or remembrance. Others think it was just a way to avoid talking to bad customers. Either way, you begin to appreciate it. Dilsiz communicates through demonstration. When your pour is good, he gives you a slow blink. When it's mediocre, he performs an exaggerated slump of his shoulders. When it's awful, he somehow manages to sigh without opening his mouth. It's impressive, honestly. But beneath the gestures and the quiet, there's deep skill. You learn to read the bubbles. Yes, the bubbles. A tight, uniform foam, perfect. Large, chaotic ones, back to the fire. Dilsiz once flips your sezve for getting cocky. You clean it for an hour while he lounges with a cup and a book of Persian poetry. One afternoon, he pulls a dusty box from beneath a cushion. Inside is a collection of tiny cups, each different, one painted with fish, another with geometric stars, another shaped like a tulip. He lines them up like soldiers, then pauses dramatically. You understand, each cup has a purpose. Some, he gestures, are for dignitaries, others for mystics. One, he insists with a stern frown, is only to be used if someone weeps before their second sip. It's ridiculous. It's beautiful. That evening, a woman enters the shop and orders her coffee sade, no sugar. Dilsis raises an eyebrow, not judgmental, just curious. As you brew, he circles like a hawk, occasionally adjusting the coals, sniffing the air, correcting your hand position with a nudge of his elbow. You serve it. The woman drinks, smiles, and leaves without a word. Dilsis nods once. You're learning. Later that night, you find yourself mimicking his habits. You walk slower, breathe deeper, brew with more intention. You even stop talking to your sesve, something you didn't realize you were doing until you caught yourself saying, "Don't betray me again." You sit in the back, cup in hand, steam curling upward like incense. You think about how coffee has always been this bridge, between worlds, between classes, between noise and stillness. You think about Dilsis and how, without uttering a word, he's told you everything you need to know. And when he passes you his prized sesve at closing time, it's not just a tool, it's a compliment. You nod, grateful. He grunts. And somehow, you understand. You've finished your cup, thick, dark, satisfying. But as you swirl the last dregs of coffee around the bottom, something else begins to surface. Your future, or at least a vague suggestion of it that looks suspiciously like a duck. Welcome to the ancient and oddly addictive world of tasseography, coffee fortune-telling. It's practiced all across the Ottoman Empire, from palace ladies to market vendors, and tonight you're getting your very first reading. The setting is perfect. A softly lit courtyard, cushions scattered around a low table, and a slightly mysterious woman with a scarf wrapped high and tight around her head, like she's hiding centuries of secrets beneath it. She calls herself Zahra, and she claims she can read a man's life in the twist of a coffee grain. First, she instructs you to drink your coffee slowly while focusing on a wish. This part's easy. You've been drinking slowly for weeks now. As for the wish, you think it, then take your last sip, grimacing at the bitter sludge that no amount of cinnamon can disguise. Next, she tells you to flip your cup upside down onto the saucer. Let the grounds fall as they will, she whispers dramatically, and let the truth arise. You flip it. A moment of silence, then a soft tap, tap, tap on the back of the cup with her ring finger. She lifts the cup, peers inside, and begins. Historians still argue whether tasseography came from Byzantine superstition, Persian traditions, or was a purely Ottoman invention. Regardless of its roots, by the 16th century it was everywhere. People read their cups after breakfast, after banquets, even between business meetings. It was part entertainment, part therapy, part mild existential crisis. Zahra furrows her brow. There is a bridge, she begins. You are crossing it, but beneath it swims a large fish, possibly a carp, possibly regret. You nod solemnly. She turns the cup slightly. Ah, here. This is clearer. I see two birds. One flies north. The other gets distracted and flies in circles. You begin to suspect she's describing your love life. The cup rotates again. Her tone softens. This is good. You see this shape? It's a crescent moon, which means new beginnings, or perhaps insomnia. Depends how much sugar you used. You didn't use any. Make of that what you will. She reads on. A distant cousin is thinking of you. A journey is coming, possibly by boat, possibly through an emotional meltdown. There is a man with a hat who holds the key to your next step. He may or may not be an actual locksmith. You're too far in to stop now. She pauses, holds the cup toward the oil lamp, and squints. There's something here, she murmurs. It's hard to say. It might be a horse or a broom. Either way, you'll be cleaning up after someone. You can't help but laugh. She grins just briefly, then masks it with a dramatic flourish of her scarf. What's fascinating is how naturally the ritual flows. You find yourself invested, not because you believe every grain-shaped prophecy, but because it slows you down. Like the coffee ritual itself, the reading is deliberate, rich with pauses and mystery. Zara finishes with a flourish. I see one final shape, a cup inside a cup. That means you'll drink more coffee. She winks. Congratulations. You thank her, offer a coin, which she accepts with the gravitas of a banker accepting an inheritance, and sit back, cup still warm in your hand. Later, she shows you how to read your own. Not with certainty, she says, but with curiosity. Look for connections, not conclusions. Let the shapes speak slowly, and never, ever ignore a snail. It always means something tedious is about to happen. As you examine your own cup, you begin to see shapes too. A spiral, a mountain, a small child chasing a goat. You wonder if you're reading the grounds, or if they're reading you. The courtyard is quiet now, just the creak of a wooden chair and the soft rustle of leaves. Zara lights a small cone of incense and hums a tune that may or may not be about ungrateful cousins. You realize how many people in the empire must have sat just like this, under moonlight, cupping the last dregs of their coffee, wondering about bridges and birds and what the future might brew next. You leave your cup upside down just in case it has more to say. You're walking through the bustling neighborhood of Üsküdar now, ferry crossing behind you, the city's silhouette shimmering across the Bosphorus. The streets here are quieter than the palace, more domestic than the Kahvehan. But today's lesson isn't in flavor or foam. It's in something deeper. How coffee became a mechanism of obedience, disguised as a delight. Your teacher today is a retired palace steward, stooped but sharp-eyed, with fingers permanently stained the color of walnut husks. He invites you into his modest home, where the furniture seems to have been arranged by someone who enjoys testing knees. Cushions everywhere, tables nowhere. You accept your seating assignment, which appears to be half a rug, and brace yourself. He hands you a cup without a word. It's bitter, exceptionally so. He smiles like this was a test, and you failed deliciously. Then he begins. In my day, he says, coffee was slower. Everything was slower, on purpose. He explains that in the inner workings of Ottoman society, particularly within the palace, rituals of slowness were more than tradition. They were tools. By stretching time, by enforcing etiquette, you taught patience. You trained people to wait. And waiting in a court where your fate could swing on a raised eyebrow was everything. Now he tells you about the ceremonial 40 steps a server must take to reach the Sultan, pausing briefly at every 10th for a silent prayer. How the tray must be rotated 3 times before serving, once for the Sultan, once for the court, once for Allah. All of it slow, deliberate, anchored. Historians still argue whether this ritualistic pace originated as a display of opulence or a survival tactic. Some suggest it emerged from Sufi influence, where stillness is sacred. Others say it simply kept everyone from panicking in a palace that could change loyalties faster than a hot chesve boils over. The steward leans in and says something you don't expect. Coffee wasn't about refreshment, it was about control. Served slowly, accepted silently, consumed in measured sips. It taught humility without saying a word. You raise an eyebrow, he shrugs. You spill a hot cup on the wrong guest, you'll find out how humble you really are. He sips again, letting the silence stretch until you feel it in your bones. You think back to the palace, how long each step took, how the Sultan never reached for his own cup, how everyone from vizier to janitor fell into the same rhythm around the kave tray. You start to realize that the etiquette wasn't just about politeness, it was infrastructure, a soft power grid that ran through the empire's veins, binding people not with iron or gold, but with foam, sugar, and the unspoken rule that you do not rush greatness. The steward tells you about an incident. He won't say which sultan, too dangerous still, where a cup arrived too hot, too fast. The server meant no harm, but the guest burned his lip. That guest? A general with a fragile ego and a fondness for dramatic punishment. The server vanished the next day. Officially, transferred to provincial duties. Unofficially, probably now one with the soil. Even speed, the steward says, can be a threat. But it wasn't all menace. There was safety in the rhythm too. By enforcing slowness, the empire created predictability. Everyone knew the steps. Everyone could find comfort in the ritual, like a lullaby in ceramic form. You sip again, more carefully this time. The bitterness feels earned. Then he pulls out a small chipped tray. My first, he says. You recognize the design, floral edges, soft crackle glaze. He tells you how it once held a cup for the chief architect, and how he had to balance it across a gravel courtyard in full wind while wearing sandals that may as well have been made from fish skins. It didn't spill, he says proudly. You nod with appropriate reverence. He smiles and places the tray back under a cushion, where it clearly belongs more than you do. Before you leave, he offers you one last truth. They say the empire was built on swords and ships, he says, but I think it was cups. You walk out into the evening, head full of foam and footsteps, understanding at last that in a world this vast, slowness wasn't a flaw. It was strategy. Today is not a normal day. Today, you're prepping coffee for someone who can ruin your life with a raised eyebrow. There's been a summons from the palace, not a general call, not a routine assignment. A tasting has been scheduled, a rare, whispered event where a tray of freshly brewed coffee is offered to someone very, very important, perhaps a vizier, maybe even a sultan's cousin who once insulted a tree and still got promoted. The stakes are high. You're nervous. Your tsezvi is nervous. Even the sugar cubes are sweating. The kitchen is alive with pressure. Brass pots clang. Water is drawn from a spring you're told is less judgmental. Everything has to be perfect. And by perfect, they mean exactly, precisely, spiritually correct. Not a grain more, not a grain less. Your task is simple in theory. Prepare 3 small cups, 1 sade, no sugar, 1 orta, medium sweet, 1 shekerli, so sweet it could pass as dessert. These 3 will be tasted in sequence by the guest. They will not know who brewed what, but the kitchen staff will. And if even one is judged tepid or muddy, there's going to be a strongly worded Ottoman memo, and someone, maybe you, will end up organizing chamber pots. Historians still argue whether these tastings were genuine tests of quality or subtle political theater. Either way, reputations were made and destroyed over the foam level in a porcelain cup. Your mentor, who's seen 4 sultans and 5 imperial plumbers come and go, leans in and whispers, "Don't forget to swirl the sesve 3 times counterclockwise before pouring. They say clockwise stirs bad luck." You want to argue, but now is not the time to tempt fate. You grind the beans, carefully, slowly, the burr mill releasing that comforting growl like a well-fed lion. The grounds fall into your hand like dark sand, warm and fragrant. You mix with water in silence, add the sugar per cup, and place the sesves on the coals. You don't blink, you don't breathe. The first bubble rises, lift, wait. Foam forms, back down. The ritual dance. Too little heat and the foam collapses. Too much and it froths like a scandal. When they're ready, you pour, evenly, delicately, like pouring a secret. The tray is lined with embroidered cloth. The cups sit in golden zarfs. The napkins are folded like swans that regret existing. The bashkavachi inspects the tray, nods once, and it disappears into the long corridor toward judgment. You wait. 15 minutes pass, then 30. You begin rethinking your entire life. You consider becoming a fisherman or a goat therapist, something less stressful. Finally, the tray returns. 2 cups are empty, 1 half full. No comment, just the tray. You panic. Was the half full one yours? Was it a critique? A comment on politics? A dietary concern? The kitchen steward, ancient and amused, pats your shoulder and says, "No word is better than bad word." You're not comforted. Later, someone whispers that the guest praised the second cup. You don't know which one that was. You don't ask. But your name gets marked in the kitchen register with a small circle instead of a line. That's supposed to mean something good, probably. You spend the evening wiping down your sesve, whispering to it like a co-conspirator. You survived. You didn't burn the foam. No one wept. That's a win. And honestly, the whole experience teaches you something. The tension, the pacing, the hovering sense of judgment. It's not the opposite of etiquette. It's the core of it. Ottoman coffee culture doesn't just teach grace, it tests it. Grace under heat, grace under scrutiny, grace when the cup is half full, or worse, half left. You're up before dawn again, and this time your mission isn't a palace task or a neighborhood visit. It's something altogether more covert. You're heading to the edge of the city, where a caravan is rumored to be preparing a journey eastward, not with silks, not with spices, but with coffee, green beans, raw and hopeful, packed in canvas sacks like smuggled treasure. Coffee, you see, is no longer just an Ottoman obsession. Other empires have noticed. The Venetians want it. The French are whispering about it. The British are sniffing around port cities. And somewhere along the Red Sea coast, a few enterprising Dutch traders have offered increasingly suspicious gifts to increasingly suspicious locals. And the Ottomans? Well, they're nervous. Coffee isn't just a drink anymore. It's an economic asset, a cultural weapon, and one the empire doesn't intend to give up easily. The caravan you find at the city's edge is led by a wiry man with an enormous turban and an even more enormous mustache. He looks like someone who's lied successfully for a living. He doesn't tell you his name, just points to a crate and says, "Lift gently." These are not onions. You peek inside. Pale green coffee beans, unroasted, light as jade, smelling faintly of rain and dust. They're being transported under the pretense of medicinal herbs, bound for a coastal shipment that will eventually, indirectly, reach lands where coffee is whispered about, like forbidden magic. Historians still argue whether these early shipments were sanctioned by Ottoman defectors, bribed port officials, or just clever smugglers. The truth? All of the above. Coffee spread not in grand announcements, but in seeds slipped between robes, in beans wrapped in letters, in unmarked crates like the ones you're now guarding. Your job is simple. Accompany the shipment as far as the port, make sure no one opens the wrong bag, and absolutely do not drink the cargo. You last about an hour. The campfire is glowing. The night air is crisp, and the temptation is unbearable. You pull out a few beans, not too many, and roast them slowly over embers, just like Dils's taught you. The scent rises, wild and floral. You grind them with a borrowed stone, boil water in a battered tin, and brew a cup that tastes like danger. A merchant nearby notices. He asks for a sip. You hesitate, then shrug. He takes one mouthful and mutters, "This will start a war." He's only half joking. The next morning, the caravan winds its way down a switchback road, crates balanced precariously on the backs of camels, who clearly weren't consulted about this plan. You ride beside the lead trader, who finally speaks. "This bean," he says, "has more power than 1,000 swords." You ask why he thinks so. He grins. Because a sword disappears when it's sheathed, coffee keeps working even after the cup is empty. You reach the port town by dusk, narrow alleys, loud gulls, spices in the air. The crates are moved, quietly, discreetly, onto a merchant ship registered under a false name with an even falser crew. Your job is done. Almost. Before you leave, the trader hands you something, a tiny pouch, inside, 3 green coffee beans. "Plant one," he says. "Roast one. Give one to someone who can't sleep." You ask what happens if you mix them up. He winks. "Then you'll be exactly like the rest of us." As you ride back toward Istanbul, the night thick with wood smoke and sea mist, you reflect on how strange it is that this humble drink, once just a stimulant for drowsy mystics, has become a currency, a commodity, a quiet revolution. And you somehow have become one of its keepers. Not bad for someone who used to spill half the cup. It's a misty morning in Ayyub, the kind of gray that muffles footsteps and makes even the minarets look sleepy. You've been summoned to a small household near the cemetery, where an elderly woman named Safiye Hanım requests your assistance for a coffee service, unlike any other, a cup for the dead. At first, you think it's metaphorical, a poetic flourish. But no, this is real. This is ritual. Safiye Hanım greets you at the threshold with the gravity of someone who has buried more friends than she's cooked for. Her home is filled with the scent of lavender and rose attar. Quiet. Still. She leads you to the sitting room, where a small table has already been set with 2 cups, one for her, one for the guest who cannot drink. This was his favorite, she says, and you know immediately who she means. A husband, maybe. A brother. Someone whose shadow still lingers in the fabric of the cushions. You begin the preparation slowly. This is not a time for flourish or foam. The sezve is smaller, the pour gentler. No sugar, just the pure, bitter brew. You light a piece of oud and wave the smoke over the cups before placing one gently on the low table beside a single flower in a cracked glass vase. Historians still argue whether these offerings to the dead were rooted in Sufi custom, pre-Islamic Anatolian rites, or simply a deep human need to remember through ritual. You're beginning to believe it doesn't matter. The result is the same, a cup poured not for a mouth, but for memory. Safiye sips her own slowly, eyes never leaving the other cup. She speaks, not loudly, not clearly. Little fragments, a joke about a crooked painting, a complaint about a neighbor's rooster, a story about a market day long gone. You listen, not because you need to, but because she seems to need it more. At one point, she chuckles. He always hated bitter coffee, she said it made his face fold in on itself. Then she takes another sip of her own, lips pressed in a small, private smile. The cup beside hers remains untouched, of course, but it isn't empty. It holds more than coffee. It holds presence, memory, and perhaps, in some small, mystical way, companionship. You stay for the entire ritual, about an hour, though time feels strange here. Eventually, she nods, and you know the service is done. You collect the cups, rinse them in silence, and leave one turned upside down on a shelf above the stove. So he can find it if he gets thirsty, she explains. As you gather your things, she presses a small tin into your hands. From his last batch, she says. He ground it himself. Use it for someone who needs comfort. You nod, unsure of what to say. She closes the door with the same quiet care you showed the Sezve earlier. Later that week, you begin to notice more of these quiet tributes around the city. A lone cup left at a cemetery wall, a saucer placed on a windowsill beside a fading photograph. In some neighborhoods, it's custom to pour a few drops of coffee into the earth before the first sip, an unspoken toast to those no longer sipping. There's even a rumor, whispered of course, that in certain shrines, the caretakers brew a daily cup and leave it near the prayer niches. No one ever drinks it, but the pot is always clean, the grounds always fresh. You understand now that Ottoman coffee culture wasn't just about taste or tradition or even power. It was about presence, the living, the departed, the spaces between them, a hot cup, a quiet breath, a name spoken into steam. You walk home that night, slower than usual, your own Sezve tucked into your bag, heart heavier but somehow steadier. And when you reach your door, you do something you never thought to do before. You pour an extra cup, just in case. You're back in your own corner of the city now, standing behind the counter of the tiny coffee stall you've slowly turned into a kind of sanctuary. The sign above it still hangs crookedly. The roof still leaks when the rain gets personal, but the Sezve is perfect. Your movements have slowed, not from exhaustion, but from intention. You brew with the calm precision of someone who has burned a dozen batches and learned from each one. The beans are roasted in small batches, cooled in copper trays, ground by hand in the morning light. Today, a handful of regulars trickle in. A spice vendor who always asks for his cup as sweet as a merchant's promise. A midwife who insists on medium foam and absolutely no interruptions. A young student who pretends to study, but mostly just eavesdrops on the neighborhood's better gossip. They come, they sip, and they linger because the shop isn't just about the coffee. It's about the pause, the moment between errands, the quiet exhale in a world always leaning forward. You serve each one, remembering to bow slightly, to adjust the cup just so, to leave enough room on the tray for sugar, but not too much, lest someone think you're hinting at their mood. Historians still argue whether these small neighborhood stalls were descendants of the Grand Palace tradition or merely practical evolutions. You don't bother arguing, you just brew. Outside, a rain shower begins, sudden and soft. You pull the curtain aside and let in the sound. It mixes with the hiss of the coals, the clink of ceramic, the distant murmur of merchants arguing over dried figs. Someone sits at the corner stool. You don't recognize him. He's got the tired look of someone who's carried too much for too long. You say nothing, just prepare the sezvu. As you pour, the foam ripples like silk. The steam rises. He watches it, eyes half closed, and when he finally takes a sip, you see it in his shoulders. Release. That's what coffee does now. Not energize, not provoke, but anchor. You think back to everything you've learned, from the palace corridors, the women's salons, the smoky secret kahvahanis, from Zara's tasseography and Dilsiz's silent frowns, from the tray-bearing lessons of Taze and the ghost cup you poured in Ayub. It's all here, in this moment. Each cup you pour carries their fingerprints, their teachings, their slow, steady rhythm. And perhaps most importantly, it carries your own. You've stopped rushing. You pause now before each pour, not for drama, but for reverence, because you know what it means, not just the drink, but the gesture, the offering, the connection. Later, as the last customer leaves and the coals begin to cool, you sit with your own cup. No one around, no one to impress, just you, the bitter brew, and a breeze slipping through the cracked shutter like a sigh. You swirl the grounds at the bottom of your cup, not for a fortune, but as a kind of goodbye, a nod to the quiet art you've inherited. And even as the world shifts, new rulers, new fashions, maybe someday even machines that brew without waiting, you know this will endure, because there's always someone who needs a pause, a sip, a moment of stillness wrapped in warmth. And there will always be someone, like you, ready to serve it. So now the fire dims. The kezve is empty, resting on the shelf like a well-read book. The air smells of roast and resin, and the last drops in your cup cling stubbornly to the edge, like they're not quite ready to sleep either. You shift slightly, feeling the softness of the cushion beneath you, the slow hush of the rain beyond the shutter. Somewhere, a bell rings in the distance. A cat scampers across a tiled roof. Everything else is still. There's nothing left to brew tonight, only this quiet, this breath, this sense of having wandered far, through sultan's halls and back-alley kitchens, past whispered fortunes and forbidden brews, only to return here, to yourself. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let the rhythms slow. You've walked cobbled streets in embroidered slippers. You've served silent poets, studied under scowling masters, and poured a cup for the departed. And now all that remains is rest. Let the scent of cardamom linger. Let the silence deepen. And if dreams come, let them arrive in tiny porcelain cups, balanced on golden trays, carried gently through memory. Because tonight, you've learned what the Ottomans always knew, that even in an empire of walls and whispers, the smallest rituals, done slowly, done well, can make you feel infinite. Sleep well, coffee bearer. You've earned it.